Are you the fanatic we're looking for? Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is the only interactive and dynamic mock draft simulator. Dynamic means that the picks from one mock draft will influence the players that team selects in the next mock draft. This can be done with a first-round challenge. This can be done with a second-round challenge. This will be done with any mock draft from the Draft Professor. In addition, the Draft Professor has rank players functionality, allowing you to rank players and build your own big board and then compare your board to that of other users at the Draft Professor. In addition, the Draft Professor has draft a team functionality. This allows 2 or more users to snake draft a team of 22 players from the rookie pool, and then you can debate which players you like at which position and why. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. I am joined today with Owen and Cole, and we're going to go over some interior offensive line big boards. But before we get going, Owen, good to see you. How you doing today?
Good. I just went through and I actually had as I was going through making my updates for this board, getting ready to go, I realized I'm surprisingly short on centers. I know we touched on a couple of them over the few weeks episode, so I actually have a couple more guys lined up after this, so it just kind of shows how my board for today was drastically different than the ones we did as we were building up and going through the different episodes. And by the time the draft actually rolls around, my board is probably going to be significantly changed even by that point. So we could probably run this exact same episode back in about a month and it'd be totally different.
Yeah, and I was even noticing as you sent me your board, you had Donovan Jackson significantly higher now than what I think the first podcast we covered him was November. So
yeah. There was specifically, I think, because he's played a lot more left tackle now. Back then, they kind of that was like his first foray into it. He's played against Penn State, so I wanted to see that to get his look at like how he looked at left tackle. And Abdul Carter just absolutely smoked him. He got a 0 grade for pass blocking from PFF that game. So watching some other games of him at left tackle after he finally settled in, gave me a little bit of a different perspective with that one there.
Yeah. We'll give Clint a minute to get his computer straightened out. Clint, it's good to see you. How are you?
Hey, what's going on? Sorry I'm a couple minutes late. I was playing newborn going down game.
I hear you. So Clint filled in for Owen when Owen was out many weeks ago. So Clint met, let's say, the other half, right? He met Newt. Now he gets to meet Owen, and have Cole, I think this is your first time on this podcast, so welcome.
It is my first time on the IOL podcast, but I have talked to Clint before, kind of on Twitter, so we're definitely familiar.
Okay, well, I've got 3 boards in front of me, and it would help if I shared it to the podcast because, like, I'm looking at it on my other monitor, but of course, nobody else can see what I see. So here's kind of what we'll do. So the board on the left is Newt's. The board in the middle is Owen's, and the board on the right is Cole's. So, Clint, who is your top interior offensive lineman?
I think at this point it's hard not to say it's Donovan Jackson after his play, playing at left tackle for Ohio State. If you'd asked me a couple weeks ago, it would have probably been Tyler Booker. But, for them to have been as close as I had them, hell, Donovan Jackson played so well at left tackle. I think there's people discussing about that being his potential. He's going to end up being a guard. But I'd have to go with Jackson right now. I know that you're familiar with me being higher than most on Dylan Fairchild, but I won't even plug him that hard or Ratledge. I think that, down the stretch, Jackson's play kind of took the spot for me.
Okay. And Owen, who is your top?
So I'm also, as of today, it wasn't this coming into the day. It was Tyler Booker, but then I rewatched couple of my guys that I knew were going to be kind of highlighted on this show, and it's definitely now for me Donovan Jackson. I have him and Booker and Jackson with the same exact grade, but I felt what boosted Jackson up was the fact that I think he did prove that he could be kind of that spot starter, fail inside from tackle kind of player, where I thought Booker had that a little bit because he played a game at left tackle for UCF, and I didn't think he did horribly. Whereas kind of like what I talked about earlier, like when our intros there, Donovan Jackson, though, when we first covered him back in our first episode, it was he had just made the switch out to left tackle due to injury. To their current left tackle, or I can't remember if it was injury or if the guy was just playing poorly, but he ended up moving out to left tackle, and he got a 0.0 PFF grade because he got smoked by Abdul Carter against Penn State for every snap. And then eventually now I watched some of his games from the college football playoffs. He's been definitely settling in. I think the traits you saw with him at guard are really kind of shining now at tackle. I still think he's a little bit too inflexible, being able to flip those hips and drive once you get past the certain apex of his kickstands when the edge is kind of committing to that outside rush. So I do think that with Jackson, I don't know if he's going to be a true NFL tackle because I do think there's that stiffness in his hips for being a tackle itself, which isn't that big of an issue when he's at guard. But I didn't have any questions with him when it came to technique or anything when he was at guard. Just a couple of things like maybe want more with like his power and things like that. But what really did it was the fact that he showed that he can be a more versatile piece in an offensive line and really fill different holes, which is very valuable, especially when you're drafting guys who are trying to be playing all over the line when you're looking at interior offensive lineman guys.
Cool. It's interesting you mentioned the matchup against Abdul Carter, his first start at tackle. It's funny. Donovan Jackson's dad and I were talking on Twitter after that matchup because I had made a comment about Carter, eating Jackson's lunch on the pass rush snaps. His dad responded with a couple clips in the run game, and essentially it was just kind of the flip story, told that Jackson was just mauling Carter to death, with all that leg strength and drive he's got. But, I thought some really good points there. I mean, I think, probably what would be the top negative comment as far as Jackson would be, some of that contact balance, like you said, and you're going to see that obviously more at tackle. So, in the league, him at guard with that much leg drive, and really just, the simple things he needs to work on there as far as just like his hand usage and some simple footwork and the kind of stuff that an offensive line coach is going to say this is no big deal. He's got serious potential going into the Senior Bowl in terms of somebody that could start sniffing that bottom couple picks of the first round. I mean, he's been serious. For us, to a couple of us who have said, oh, it was Booker, it was Jackson, it was Booker, it was Jackson. It's like we're in the time close enough now than 100 days where risers can really take a surge here, and that's kind of what he's done here, it feels like.
Yeah. So, Cole, who is your top interior offensive lineman?
So, if we're going strictly guards, it's Tyler Booker out of Alabama. But if we're looking at those top three guys, who I all do prefer at tackle, but I know they will probably all end up getting switched into guard. Except in Gray Zabel, I don't necessarily know how it's going to play out because he does have the length and he does have the size to stick at tackle at the next level. But you look at Seven Aia and Mbao, I believe they are both sub 6'4", 6'4.5". So they are a little bit shorter and they do have that perfect size for guard. Where it comes to Jonas Seven Aia, I'm not as concerned about him kicking into guard because you're not limiting much. He's a super strong mauler. He has great hand placement at the point of attack. He has great leg drive, and he's a super smart player. So honestly, we're talking about a center prospect down the line as well. When it comes to Mbao, I really do prefer him to stick at tackle. I do have him ranked as a guard, but overall, I do have him. I like to see him stick outside. He's too athletic to kind of limit to put at guard or kick into the inside, unless you're a really, really heavy like zone team where you really do get your offensive lineman out in space and you need 5 pure athletic guys. And Bao has a nice kick slide and his hand placement is impeccable. He has a great chop when he gets hands on, or when someone gets hands on him, he will chop them down with no issue. He has I think James Foster from A to Z Sports had like a 2-minute plus long video of just straight knockdowns from Marcus Mbao. And then when you look at Gray Zabel, it's you kind of see a great athlete with pass pro upside, and he has that good inside the pads type hand placement. But it comes down to the play strength for me and why I think he should stick outside. But talking about pure guards as well, I like Tyler Booker I think he's a little bit more athletic than kind of people give him credit for. And he's a super strong mauler. He wants to beat your ass every play, and it's how he was made. Overall, he's a great leader. And from everyone I've talked to, he's widely considered among one of the best Alabama Crimson Tide football players, not even just on the offensive line, but as a whole, that they have seen come through that program.
Okay.
Before we get away from it, I thought it was interesting. I kind of, I agreed with the inbound point, talking about his athleticism and your preferences with him at tackle, but I would counter that and say he's somebody I've got circled that I think is going to get more center looks than we think.
100, yeah, I agree there.
I think, when you look at kind of what you classify as Mbau's knocks right now, kind of lunging at the waist when he's playing out at that tackle spot, a little bit off balance with his footwork, things like that. I just see being more neutralized, kicked inside. And he's somebody that if you asked me to list you the 5 guys going into Mobile I'm the most excited to see, he's a no-brainer in that top 5 because I really think he's somebody that they're going to give different looks. They're going to let get some center snaps. Just to, if nothing else, to give him more of a selling point of, off the top of my head, like a Graham Barton role, somebody that went in that draft last year that it was like, this guy can play all 5 spots. I think just adding that to him as somebody that is just trying to buy as much, going up the board as possible. He's fascinating to me. So if you hadn't mentioned him like that, I was just about to.
And it's interesting because Mbau is a player, and I should say Marcus Mbau from Purdue is a player where he's been in the database as a tackle, a guard, and then right before this episode, I flipped him to center so that Owen and I could make Owen's center graphic. So, Owen, who are your next 2 or 3 interior offensive line on your big board?
Yeah, you want me to do it based off of guard specifically? You want me to just toss in if there's going to be a center coming up at all?
Yes. I would say guard, but then if Mbau would be higher than any of like your players 2 through 4, feel free to point that out.
Okay, well, he's not, so we won't have that issue. I just wanted to make it clear for that. So for 2 through 4, I have, so Donovan Jackson was my number 1. I kind of said it earlier that he and Tyler Booker are tied for my grade wise for me. And I do want to make this one note here that I'm calling these guys 1 and 2 and stuff like that. If Will Campbell if he was eligible to be placed in this guard rankings, he'd be my number 1 guard. No problem. I see him mostly succeeding in the NFL as a guard. I know he's being projected as a tackle right now, just more of my personal preference. But starting at Jackson as my number 1 guard, we have Tyler Booker at 2. Then it's Sabania at 3. I was also on the train of I kind of prefer him at tackle, and I still do prefer him to start out at tackle, maybe like a right tackle specifically, and then fail inside the guard if you're not really excelling or liking what he's showing you out there. And then for my final guy, I have Gray Zabel from North Dakota State, another guy who I do think could play that right tackle just because he has the athleticism to go out there and play in the boundary and not have that much of an issue. It's more so length questions with those 2 guys there. So it's going to be those 3 with Zabel and Sabania really being kind of question marks whether or not I was originally going to consider him as a tackle going into this.
And would that be a day 1 grade or a day 2 grade on the guys that you just mentioned?
So everyone outside of Will Campbell, who I mentioned but isn't on the listing, are going to be starting in round 2. So from Donovan Jackson down to my what number would that be on this list? 6th guy and Fairchild, they're all going to be round 2 grades, and then from Nelson to Clay Webb, it's going to be 3rd round grades, and then after that, it's going to be more day 3 stuff.
Okay. And Clint, who are your, let's say, interior offensive linemen, like 2 through 4?
Yeah, to throw out some different names, for starters, my top center is Jared Wilson out of Georgia. 6'3", 310. This guy can haul ass. He's going to light up Indy. Not that it's the main go-to as far as testing centers, but it's like this is the kind of guy that'll go run in the 4.8s at 300 plus. When you look at just this 1 year starting at Georgia, was the backup for Cedric Van Pran for so long. This year 0 sacks allowed, only 6 pressures on over 500 pass blocking snaps. Incredibly low penalized guy. Had a penalty or two the whole year. I think he could play in any scheme. I think in particular, somebody that really runs a lot of wide zone is going to love the thought of this guy. I mean, he's only 22 years old. Real buy-in to Kirby's whole. I think this is the kind of guy that lives, breathes, and eats this stuff. Someone's going to fall in love with him. I think a little bit of a bold take, and I think if you look traditionally, a center in the last year we had 1 first rounder, a second rounder. The year before, no first rounders, 3 second rounders. That to say that I think he's somebody that gets into the second round, even if it's at the bottom end of it, because somebody from the center class is going to have to do it. And it's kind of like I said with Mbow. I think there's somebody that's going to be a center, taken as a center, that we don't consensus have as one right now. Kind of like Graham Barton last year. But getting back to the question, like I said, I had already mentioned Fairchild. He's somebody, I've got Clint Bowling, an old Bengals journeyman, played about 8 years in Cincinnati, guard. Guy's 6'5", 315, all-world high school wrestler, just kind of the term country strong. He's another one that I say, as far as consensus, I think is too low in terms of where he'll actually go. Somebody like Fairchild wouldn't have come out if he was going to be some day 3 pick or something. I don't see that. I think he's somebody that's definitely going to be. I got him at a 3rd right now. I really like how much Zabel was getting mentioned, because I could have said that, but in the spirit of doing something different, I've got Zabel down there as a right tackle as well, but I've also got him in here as an outside zone guard. I really love the guy's tape, man. I think he's somebody that I'd like to have around the top 50 players or so right now. And then just lastly, if you kind of looked at who's in that, is he a tackle? Is he a guard? I liked how much people were mentioning Savagnier, because I've got him at right tackle currently, but with the ability to, go in and be a guard if needed. And I'd throw another name lastly, Wyatt Milam out of West Virginia as a zone tackle. I've comped to Luke Gedeke, right tackle out of the Bucks, but that's somebody that I say we had just mentioned Will Campbell, for example. I just mentioned Kelvin Banks, for example. Some of these tackles that might kick into guard, we're kind of having the Peter Skoronski, Zach Tom, et cetera, conversations. That'd be another one I'd kind of throw out there that's somebody that's going to be at the Senior Bowl that I'm interested to see as far as getting some guard snaps for someone that's being projected as such.
Yep. So, Owen, who are like the next, I guess in your next tier is that Ratledge, Fairchild, and Nelson that you said that you have a round 3 grade on?
Yeah. So I think actually from Ratledge is actually my last second rounder. And then after that, you get into, that's where you got to start to see before that, between Zabel and Savagnier, I have Seth McLaughlin. I'm actually a huge Seth McLaughlin guy. I know me and Jim are in this Buffalo Bills Discord together where it has a specific draft tab. And I was watching him earlier today, and I kind of dropped it in there because he's a guy who went from Alabama to Ohio State, has that kind of pedigree there, but he popped his Achilles in practice back in November. So he's going to be someone who's going to be, I think, has talent to be a starter in the NFL on the offensive line, especially at center. But he's going to be someone who can't be drafted to a place that's going to expect him to start right away just because of that injury. So I have him graded as a round 2 guy, but I do think he's going to fall into that day 3 conversation. So he's kind of a messy eval there when it comes to projecting where he's going to land. But yeah, Ratledge is my last second round grade. Then I have Marcus Mbow at a high 3rd, specifically at center. I think a lot of what we talked about earlier with Mbow, especially what Cole mentioned, seeing why you think he'd work out at tackle. I think all those things are true, and I think they would actually amplify why he'd work best at center, specifically with how centers, when it comes to not having to be these kind of big mauler guys. You can typically get one of those if you want, but if you want to get a guy like Mbao, who's like this athletic freak who can get out in space and place him at center, which is kind of what he's being projected to being right now, especially once he gets to the Senior Bowl. I'm sure they're going to test him out to see how he snaps. But you can have him be that double team moving up to the second level and have him just live in that second level when you're run scheming there, which is where I think he excels the most when it comes to playing. I know I watched the tape that he put on when he was playing at guard back against Michigan in 2022, including his tackle stuff. So I do think the kick inside the guard did improve him even way back before he was at his full prime where he is now 2 years prior to this most recent tape. But I do think going into center will help him out there. And then, yeah, after those guys who kind of also mentioned Fairchild, I'm not nearly as high on him as Clint is, but I do think he's one of my sleeper guys that, wrestling background, only had 10 starts before throughout the season or from when we first evaled him. I think he was at his 10th start at that point. And you can just tell he understands the leverages. He's got a good athleticism to him. He needs some more seasoning, but I do think he's got some of that coaching up from Georgia that Georgia gives out there with his kind of IQ there. So I do like Fairchild. And then just to wrap up that little section, one of my guys, he's gonna be specifically one of my guys in this draft is going to be Jack Nelson in Wisconsin. I know that was kind of a conversation between me and Newt when we first covered him on this podcast because he's the 6'7" left tackle at Wisconsin, and you're kind of curious how that's going to work when it goes to projecting him inside. You don't want him to get into your quarterback's passing lanes. I personally think that Nelson has the ability to play with some flexibility in his knee bend and in his hips to be able to keep that lower pad level, and he did play some guard in his time at Wisconsin, so he showed to be able to do that. And I think it was back in 2023 or 2022. I watched one of his games playing that. So I think Nelson having some of these
starts at right guard in 2021. You're dead on.
Yeah. He had a start there. So I personally think he can kick inside, and that'll minimize the kind of stuff that you see with him at left tackle right now and really excel what he can do. So that's one of my guys in this area is Jack Nelson there at 7.
Awesome mention about Nelson too, because you mentioned him swing. It's like I think that's where his money making is in terms of draft capital and getting picked as high as possible. Is somebody late 2, early 3? Because I like Nelson a lot as well. I got excited when you said his name. That's somebody that I'm like, somebody could kind of fall for that guy that needs a swing to develop even for a year or so. I mean, I cover the Falcons. That's a prime example. Caleb McGarry at right tackle heading out the door soon. Jake Matthews will probably play until he's 45 at left tackle, honestly. But right tackle is a good example. Just to say somebody for a year as a swing, that's a great mention. I like that.
So, Cole, where do you have Jack Nelson?
Yeah, so I have not actually taken a deep look at him at guard like Owen had suggested, but I do like his kind of lateral movement skills. I like his jump sets a lot. He's obviously a strong dude with a nice anchor at 6'7". That's kind of expected, and he has a filled out frame. So I could totally see him kind of kicking into guard. I have him at a 3rd to 4th round grade. Him and Riley Mahlman, the other Wisconsin tackle, who I believe Mahlman did go back. But him and Mahlman were both kind of my guys. Mahlman more than Nelson, but I did like Nelson a good bit. And I think, honestly, I'd probably like him a little bit more at guard than at tackle.
It is worth noting his dad got drafted out of Wisconsin into the NFL as an offensive lineman as well, playing some multi-positions there. So just saying somebody that kind of lives and breathes it and knows going into the league and having to change positions and being open to that, et cetera. That's a great name to be thrown out. I wasn't anticipating. I was expecting everybody to kind of have him snugged in that tackle room. So that's the most interesting mention to me thus far of this episode.
Yeah. So going back to Travis's question earlier in the podcast, Armand Membu, do you guys have him at tackle? Do you have him at interior offensive line? The reason he's not on any of the graphics is that he's in the database as a tackle. So that's not any fault of the other 3 podcasters. That's on me for what his position label is in the database. But Cole, where do you have Armand Membu? Guard or tackle, and where is he on the board?
Yeah, so actually I do have Membu at tackle. I know he's 6'3", and it could be even shorter than that because I don't have verifieds on him, but I know he is listed at 6'3" on Mizzou's website. But he's a great athlete, and he has really nice core. core strength, so you're not really going to see him get kind of like thrown off on push pulls as much. He does have a little bit of an awkward kind of like movement where on his kick set, so like lean forward a little bit, but he like almost always recovers, and he can kind of get kind of like tossed around like a little bit of a ragdoll because his play strength is a little bit questionable. But like I said, back to that core strength, it really does not affect him as much as it should for being a little bit lighter and a little bit smaller. He does have decent arm length. I think I did see 33 plus inch arms somewhere. So it's not really a concern about the arm length. And to be honest, I do prefer my tackles a little bit shorter. That like 6'4" to 6'5" spot is really where I love to see tackles at, which I know is not always going to happen, but it's not really a height thing for me. It's just always an arm length thing. And Membu does have the arm length to stick out at right tackle. It just comes down to, do you feel comfortable kicking him into guard because he's 6'3", but has a little bit less play strength than a typical NFL guard would have.
Okay. Owen, have you gotten to Armand Membu yet?
I've glanced over him a little bit because I saw his name popping up after he declared from the zoo, and I think is he going to the Senior Bowl, one of the bowl games, one of the pro All-Star things. So I had his name pop on my radar. I gave him a little once over, not super in depth, especially because I know that he has that lack of height where he's listed at 6'3". Usually those schools like the fudge numbers a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if he came in 6'2" and some change, which is usually where you're looking at for your guards, and you're starting to say like that's kind of hitting that ceiling or that floor when it comes to a tackle. Like he's getting kind of below it. So I gave him a once over. I do think he's athletic enough, and kind of similar to what we talked about with Sabania and Zabel, and even looking up further with like guys like Jackson and Booker. There's a trend now in the modern NFL where there's more guys who like to play with these quicker or more lateral sets where they want to get into the defenders more so than get these vertical drops and kind of be more of the reactionary blocker to these edge rushers. So if you have this trend going on where you have guys who prefer to have more hands-on and maybe aren't as comfortable with the vertical sets, and in the past you used to say that's cemented, okay, he's going to be a guard, he's not comfortable taking those more vertical sets. You have teams that are running a lot more RPOs and are a lot more comfortable with guys who can do those kind of quick sets and get out into the open field quicker with the athleticism that a guy like Membu has. So I think he could play right tackle. I'm not going to say anything definitively until I get my deep dive into him, but I do think he has a pathway there that some of the other guys we talked about earlier that we think could fail from tackle inside to guard. It's kind of a similar pathway there.
And Clint, where do you have Armand Membu? Guard, tackle, and where is he on the board?
I've got Membu at right tackle right now. I think he's just simply the fact, 30 starts in the SEC at right tackle this year, over 400 pass blocking snaps, no sacks allowed, less than 10 pressures. The productivity's there. I think when you dig deeper than just looking at the surface levelness of the 6'3", 314 listed for him, he's somebody that's got 33 and a half, 34-inch kind of arms. Somebody a little more standard on somebody to Cole's point about, somebody more like 6'5". So frankly, I don't know that his match of more of that compact guard-like build paired with tackle arm length, it's not a little bit of an advantage for him. It gives him a lot of versatility. I think that's one reason you're seeing him climb up a lot of boards. Like Dane Brugler, for example, is kind of what's really got the name trending. Because we've said for a while here, I even said this on the last appearance on this show, was that this tackle class is hungry for a riser, and I think we found him here. And he's somebody that's going to be comfortable for a team. Let's say he goes in the first round. Let's get super extreme here and go to his ceiling, go super high. Let's say he goes to San Francisco at 11. Let's just extreme. You imagine the amount of comfort for a team like that really needs help at all 5 offensive line spots to just say, like, I can take this guy. We got a right tackle need. We got a spot on either side of the center here on the interior. We can't screw this up. Because when you look at him projecting him guard, tackle, etc., I've already mentioned the arm length. The kid fires off the ball, man. I mean, if enough to play at tackle, and if you put him at guard, I did love the point made earlier by Cole about he said play strength. I'd kind of counter that and say, hey, he needs to just get a little nastier. If he was going to play guard, he's got to work on the mean streak a little bit. I think he is somebody that can kind of lean on the fact he's just so overly athletic. I think if he could really get more technical in the things like hand placement, whether it was to completely hone in on right tackle, whether it was to kick inside, he's just going to be a really comfortable prospect for a lot of teams. But I've got him at right tackle right now. I've got him currently at tackle 4 behind Banks, Campbell, and Josh Simmons. And I'll tell you, I'm feeling out that 3. I'm feeling out that 3 through about 5 spot. And here, we mentioned him going into the Senior Bowl. He's one that's going to be fascinating. But, I mean, look, 21 years old. He's going to – I know I've said this buzzword, take a shot every time Clint says comfortable during the segment. But I just think he's in a tackle class where it's a lot of volatility and he's going to be one that somebody might kind of lean back on.
Yep. And we haven't done an offensive tackle ranking episode. So as I'm sitting here listening to the questions in the chat and you guys talking, I'm beginning to realize, okay, we need to do an offensive tackle ranking episode to also plant our flags on a few subjects. But Cole, I noticed that at number 7, you have Jackson Slater, and he's not on the graphic for Owen or Newt. So what do you want to tell us about Jackson Slater as your 7th interior offensive lineman?
Yeah, real quick before I get to Jackson Slater, kind of back to Membu, there's one more point I do want to make. That kid's been through the gauntlet of SEC edge rushers. You got Nick Scorton, Shamar Stewart, LT Overton, even Jamarian Latham out of Alabama isn't a bad edge rusher by any means. But you kind of look at it with LT Overton got the best of him because he could match that athleticism by Membu. And because Membu doesn't have that mean streak that LT Overton has, he kind of got the best of him in that Alabama game. So that is one thing I did want to quickly touch over. But back to Jackson Slater. Yeah, this is a true guard, and I cannot wait to watch him at the Senior Bowl. He's a senior, I believe. He might even be a 5th year. He has solid size for the guard position. He is an average athlete. I wouldn't say he's anything crazy athletically, but that's why you're looking at him as a guard. You look at it, he's a mauler. That entire Sacramento State team, I harped on one of their tight ends, that they are just trained to beat the hell out of people. And when I was watching Slater, I'm not sure if it was a product of him being much better than the competition level that he was at the FCS level, or if it's just because he is really just that dude. And kind of watching him, I kind of get reminded of Quinn Miners a little bit, and just the way he plays, not necessarily like an exact 1-for-1 comp, but hand placement's great. His clamp is awesome in pass pro. You see him constantly move from a kick slide. He wants to power down. He powers down relatively easily. Super strong. I believe he had a 405 to 455 power clean. So you're not really worried about the core strength or any of the hip mobility there, because you got to have something there extra to be able to hit a weight that heavy there. Just kind of looking at it, I have a 3rd round grade on Jackson Slater, and I really cannot wait for the Senior Bowl to see what he does against the bigger name interior defensive lineman and see how he does there in pass pro situations in the one-on-ones, or if it comes from like any double team work and indie drills. So I'm really excited to see what he can do there, and it can definitely fluctuate up or down. I'm just kind of banking on the fact that competition level isn't much of a concern. BC was just that much better than everybody else.
Okay, and then Owen, the next guy on your list is Clay Webb. So what do you want to tell everybody about him?
Yeah, Webb was one of these guys that we covered on the earlier episodes of the podcast. He's got Jacksonville State. I think he originally, if I'm just double checking this here, he transferred in from Georgia to Jacksonville State back in the 2020-2021 season. He's year 2021 through that transfer process. So he's been in college since 2019. So he's been around the block a little bit. Webb was one of those guys that you throw it on, and similar to kind of what he was talking about with Slater, how you're interested in watching this guy against lower level competition. But even then, Webb, I was able to watch games against teams like Louisville and Liberty and Western Kentucky, which aren't anything to really scoff at. And you can see him have some of those things that you see why he was recruited to a powerhouse like Georgia was. He's originally from Alabama, so he's in that kind of deep South area. So it's not really surprising that he was kind of found in those lower level or lower Southern schools there. And I just felt like he was a really good athlete. I loved his movement, hip flexibility, and explosiveness, kind of all those things that you're really looking for these guards, especially again at lower levels who are then playing against upper level teams, where he just looked like one of the best athletes overall on the field, despite regardless of size. And I liked him in space. I didn't love his power, which is something I was kind of concerned with because he's against lower level competition and against higher level competition. You'd like to see he's getting challenged with these kind of bigger defenders, and if he's able to have that athleticism and then also combine it with some more, people moving skills, you'd like to see that as kind of like the big package just to kind of sum it all up. But he kind of left me wanting more there. So he's a guy that I find interesting because he has such high upside, and you can see why he's such a high recruit. He has plays where he does absolutely steamroll guys, because a lot about blocking, especially in space where he excels, is going to be mass times acceleration. If you have speed at a size that Webb is at, which he was listed at 6'3", 290, which isn't the biggest guy, but he has the movement to be able to overcome some of those other size concerns, to be able to build up some momentum and really lay out blocks. But then at the same time, against like Louisville, you're seeing him get flat backed by linebackers when he climbs to the second level and doesn't really have that momentum behind him. So I think I have him as the latest around 3 grade I can give a guy, just because you can tell there's the physical talent there, and he has flashes of being able to put it all together. It's more so it's a guy that you're going to bring in, want to be kind of your extra offensive lineman, and see if you can really tap into that potential and see if you can unlock some more stuff there when it comes to like a guy like Webb, and seeing like what you can really pull out of him, because it's definitely there in flashes on tape.
Okay, and then the next player you have on your board, Owen, is Luke Kandra. So I definitely want to give a shout out, because the last time we covered Luke Kandra, we had a lot of retweets from Luke Kandra's family. So if they are listening now, thank you. But you want to explain where Luke Kandra is on your big board and what you like about him?
Yeah, it's unfortunate Newt isn't here, because this is kind of his guy there. He got him at all the way up number 4 on his board that we have on the graphics. So Kandra was a guy. When I first watched him, I kind of gave him the cursory glance, got as deep as I could into him with a little bit of a time crunch going into the episode. So I didn't really give him as much due diligence as I wanted to, but I knew Newt had a whole soliloquy built up. So I was ready to just let him ride, and then finally come back like with this episode specifically and have like my full concise thoughts on him. Kandra's a guy who went back to UC. He's from the Cincinnati area, and is a guy that you can definitely see being like a starter level player in the NFL. I don't think he has like the greatest ceiling. I personally think he's adequate when it comes to like moving out in space and having the ability to reach and flip his hips and seal out on the edge there. So I think he has NFL level athleticism. He has some nasty to his game. There was that play against Arizona State that Newt tweeted and retweeted and was just drooling over, where he absolutely demolishes a corner after sealing the edge against the edge there. It was just extra blocks. He like ended up blocking like 3 dudes on one play. So he's got that kind of nasty. He's got some intelligence there when picking up blitzes. I just think there's kind of a ceiling when it comes to some of his athleticism and other stuff, which I've been wrong about in past. I've definitely seen guys who have those flashes, but then you would like to see it be more consistent. Kind of the opposite of what I say with Clay Webb, where you see him consistently be that kind of move blocker, and you can see like consistently what that athleticism is. I see the flashes with Kandra. I think he's more developed technically and with more consistency than a guy like Webb. It's just I don't know where that ceiling is going to be. So I have him eventually landing at like his ceiling with being an adequate level starter, never like a plus level starter at the NFL level at guard, but someone you can draft and you can bring him in and be fine with him being like your 4th or 5th best offensive lineman. You can definitely live with that and win with that.
And Cole, where do you have Kandra? You have him at 8 right after Slater, right?
Yep. So I have a 3rd round grade on Kandra. I believe it's the Pittsburgh game. There's a play where it looked like it was like outside zone of some sort, where him, the center, Gavin Gerhardt, and D'Artagnan Tinsley all got pancakes on that play. And I watched that play from Kandra, and he kind of led the way because it was outside zone run to his right side. So he was kind of the lead blocker there on the interior, and it was like a domino effect after he got that first pancake. You can kind of tell by watching tape when one of them gets, specifically Condra, when one of them gets a nice block or a pancake, they all kind of build off of that with some sort of energy on the next play. And Condra definitely has a little bit of a mean streak to him, excuse me. And like Owen said with the athleticism, I value it a little bit more than I think Owen is at the moment, which is okay. I think that he has slightly above average NFL athleticism at guard. By no means is this a guy you're going to send to Miami to go be in a full zone scheme. This is a guy that can play gap, can play zone. He kind of fits that, like, I'm going to just say the Carolina Panthers because he kind of fits that gap heavy team that runs a little bit of that like split zone on occasion, that like wide zone type of look on occasion, kind of sprinkled in there. He fits that type of role at a guard spot, and I think he can easily be your third to fourth best lineman when you draft him. I have a third round grade on him, and I could totally see him going even in the top 50. While I would say myself that would be a little bit rich for me, but I see no reason why a team wouldn't take a shot there because he does offer some minimal plus average to like a slightly above average NFL starter at that guard spot for any team that does take him.
And Clint, where do you have Luke Kandra?
I got Kandra as an early fourth. I think Kandra sits right here, mentioning he is going to the Hula Bowl. He'll be one of the bigger names there. But the buzzword of the segment there that Cole already said, he's an outside zone guard. And I think he kind of sits right at that tier of where you're going to drop of somebody that could get in there at the end of day 2 and then started at the start of day 3, where you're kind of going from those guys that we discussed, like your Dylan Fairchild, Gray Zabel. I have Emory Jones as a guard, for example, versus a tackle, Kandra. Then you kind of starting to get more into those definitive day 3 guys. Miles, the LSU pair, Miles Frazier, Garrett Dellinger, Xavier Truss, some more of those definite day 3 kind of guards. But Kandra, admittedly, somebody that I am excited to get a little bit more into. Like I said, him being one of the bigger names of the Hula Bowl, I'm kind of excited to geek out about him. But I've got him as a solid early fourth. I like him all right. I don't say that condescendingly. If you know me, I like him okay. Yeah.
So one of the other players I definitely wanted to hear some opinions on. So there was some Twitter slander that the simulator does not have Connor Colby ranked high enough. And Owen, you have him at 10th. So what round grade do you have on Colby, and why do you have him ranked where you do?
Yeah, so Connor Colby, similar to Kandra, is going to be that top. They're actually very similarly graded to me at the top of the 4th round. With similar scenarios with for me with Colby, as a guy like a Clay Webb, and kind of like his running partner, we're not going to be able to touch on because he did return back to school, but his center there, and it's Logan Jones. Am I getting that one right? I know I messed it up in the Discord DMs earlier, but so Connor Colby for me, he's a guy that is in that mold of these Iowa offensive linemen that you see be kind of these higher end athletes. We saw this with not to the same degree because I not mostly because I don't want to slander this guy's name because I was a huge fan of him, was Tyler Linderbaum, and similar, like I said, to the center there who's just returning. Colby played a mix of guard and tackle for them. I do think he's definitively going to be a guard in the NFL, but I do think that athleticism is going to translate over to being like, if you wanted to be like your swing guy or like an extra offensive lineman who comes in as kind of like a big tight end, he's able to move and get off the ball pretty fast there. It's going to be something where he has size. He's listed 6'6", 310. I watched back towards his 2022 stuff just to get kind of the full what's the spectrum, full spectrum of what he's starting, because he had games where he started at guard and back at tackle back in 2022. So I wanted to see what that kind of looked like when he did actually get put out on an island out there. Or maybe I have it flipped where he's tackle this year and guard back then, but No, okay, yeah, it was tackled in 2022. Just wanted to fact check that real quick. Yeah, so I watched him from back when he was in 2022 playing right tackle. He's projected more inside the guard now, and I do think that he just has that movement ability, able to get out in space and block. But he has some limitations, unlike a guy like Webb, where I saw some of that flashes of power and ability to bring that other element to his game. I felt like Colby was more of just that move blocker guy, able to get in a way, not a people mover, more of a neutralizer. And he's somebody who you could probably find some way to get him on your feet on the offense, whether it's, like I said, it's as a move blocker, jumbo tight end, and just kind of a plug and play backup there to where you he can have the athleticism to play some places in a pinch, but you want to specifically kind of groom him to be kind of that guard. And if you think you can add some more weight onto his frame, he is 6'6" and only 310, so he can maybe pack another 5 to 10 and be some kind of a bigger body guard. But he's kind of a positionless man who has athleticism to play in the NFL. And I think that has a role and has some potential to move forward and move up into a long-term starting developmental project. Just right now, I think he's a little bit undercooked when it comes to hand technique and is more just that genuine athlete who's out there and able to get into space and block smaller people without having to really focus on winning in specific ways there.
And Clint, where do you have Colby on your board?
Yeah, I got Colby closer to a late 6th, early 7th. I liked the buzzword positionless. He's somebody I'm interested to see a little bit more. I wish he was involved in the bowl circuit. But, I think he's got outside zone tackle or guard ability. He's just somebody I worry with the play strength, with his frame, where he finds a spot. Again, back to that word positionless. I think he's interesting developmentally. And, if you're going to do a developmental project late day 3, which is the point of late day 3, to take somebody that's on the interior core at Iowa is not the worst place to kind of take a shot. Love to mention Logan Jones there. That was my sleeper guy as far as the center class. He'll be in that battle for the top 3 or 4 centers next year. But Colby's somebody I want to get a little bit more into, but I wouldn't take up a bunch of time in this segment talking about him because I don't have a ton to add. Yeah.
So Cole, how about you? Have you evaluated Connor Colby yet?
Yeah, briefly. So I kind of am teetering towards that like midday 3 range for him. I have about 2.5, 3 games into him. He kind of reminded me a little bit, kind of like towards what Clint said about that positionless aspect of Colby. A little bit of Brady Christensen coming out of, I believe, BYU in 2021 or 2022. So kind of that area where he's an athletic swing tackle, can play guard, can play anywhere on the offensive line. Not a guy I'm necessarily going to say take top 15 at the top of the 4th round, but a guy that I could totally see going there, and a team would be happy knowing what they're going to get out of Colby with that swing tackle type ceiling.
Okay. So, Owen, any more interior offensive linemen like 11 through 14 that you want to shout out? Oh, we got a treat. Parent-teacher conferences are over. How you doing, Newt?
I'm here and I'm well.
Oh, well.
Can I pop in, see how you guys are doing?
We are doing well. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
So, Owen, do you want to kind of cover like your 11 through 14, maybe what you see there, and then we'll pivot and let Newt kind of go through his top guys?
Yeah, so 11 through 14, there's kind of a wide ranging of grades here because mixing in with the centers and stuff, and then I lost about 5 or 6 guys to going back to school. So when we get down to like the Carson Vincent there, he's not really, I wouldn't have him as a draftable grade. He's kind of like the high priority UDFA, someone we threw in to kind of get some focus on an HBCU and Alabama A&M. But someone I would want to point out and like just kind of bring some attention to would be Javonte Spraggins. He's one of those guys for Tennessee where you don't love what he does technically. Personally, there was a play against Alabama. I think it happened twice where he's just spinning in a circle, like on a top. The guy doesn't beat him or anything to get to the quarterback, but he literally has like his back. He's facing his own quarterback while still engaged the block and the D tackle. And if it was a better D tackle, I'm sure would have probably cooked him on it. But a couple times there where you just see him kind of lose control, play out of play out of control there. But you see the upside there. He has some twitchy movements. He's a bigger guy and can really throw his weight around there. So I do think he's somebody that you can see where the development can go through, and that you can want to get him into some of those more power gap schemes where he can get off the ball and really get into some of these defenders and move up to that second level and dominate smaller guys. So he's another guy that I think may be limited in his versatility of like what schemes, what positions he can play, but someone who you can see fitting into specific roles and being a good player for those specific teams personally.
Cool. Well, Newt, you can like set us up for a big finish. You can kind of go through your top guys. At this point, in the first 50 minutes, Cole, Clint, and Owen pretty much gave us, let's say, their top 5 to top 8. So we already covered Luke Kandra, but we know that you need some time to cover your guys. So you want to kind of take us through your interior board?
Yeah, so I think if you take a look, and I'm sure you mentioned it already, just that board on the left, that's going to be where my guys sit, and that's kind of filling out. Spraggins sits at, as it currently stands, like number 145, but anything past 100 on my board becomes really fuzzy because I don't think I have enough players that I've looked at. Like Xavier Truss, who might be more of a tackle, Cooper Mays, Clay Webb, Carson Vinson. Those are going to be guys that don't have on there. I think, just coming some of the things that Owen had just mentioned. And I know that for a lot of people, Kandra sits probably somewhere more in that like early day 4. I love the kid. He's going to definitely be probably the one that sticks out the most. You can't teach what he has in terms of that, just that will and that ability to just fire on all cylinders on every single down. He's a kid that, while he doesn't stand out necessarily athletically, he's got good size. I think he moves well enough, and he's got everything that he needs between the ears to go out there and be an impact. I love his motor. And Jim, you've talked about that before. My guys are going to be high motor guys, whether it is Josiah Stewart, whether it's Riley Mills, Luke Kandra. Those are guys that I absolutely love. I don't think that there's a guy in this interior line group that plays with a higher motor than Luke Kandra's. And so he gets a nod for me in that top 5. I think testing is going to be a big thing for those guys. Jackson could absolutely move up. I think he's got such a high ceiling, just in terms of what he can do. I really do like Donovan Jackson. It's more like a 3A or 4A and 4B for me. But I think a lot of the other ones that are sitting there are, I don't want to call them chalk, but I think I do kind of hit consensus with some of those. I know that taking a look at Cole, he's got Embo way up there. I love Embo. I think he's great. I think he's going to kind of be one of those weird tweener guys with guard and tackle. We've had those conversations before. And I think that he's obviously got a ton of opportunities to kind of prove himself over these next month to 2 months to go. So that's kind of me. Like you said, hit a lot of those guys already. Want to pound the table real quick for my guy, Luke Kandra, and just definitely hit that right there.
Okay, and you're the only one that had Joshua Gray, and you have him in your top 10.
Oh, yeah. No, so, and this is actually kind of perfect because we didn't actually do Joshua Gray in our interior episode. You guys did him for tackle, correct?
Yeah, he was on the tackle group.
Yeah, so I got a chance. I saw his tape last year, Oregon State, when he was playing tackle, and I got a chance to see him this year as well as as an interior guy. So, just to give a little background on him, he's a 6-year senior. He started 56 games for them, over 3,000 snaps at left tackle alone. He almost played 4,000 snaps in college, which is absolutely ridiculous. 3-time All Pac-12 second team, one-time All Pac-12 third team. He was a 2023 and 2024 captain. Just a guy, once again, that you look at, hey, what are you going to do for your team? How are you going to stand out? How are you going to be a leader? All of those things, he's checking those boxes. With him, I think that there's a handful of negative things that have kept him in college football for this long. He's obviously not a standout tackle. That's kind of why he made the move into guard. I think it was a really good one for him because I think that's ultimately where he's going to find his home in the NFL. A little bit lighter at 310, and that 6'4" height, I think, is just that's guard material as far as I'm concerned. Might even be able to pack on a little bit more. When he was at tackle, I didn't love him on an island. I thought that he could get beat. To be fair, I saw him against Latu last year in that UCLA game, and he actually didn't look awful. He got beat by Latu a couple times, but he still was able to hold his own fairly well. But I think a lot of those issues that were mitigated when he moved inside, and I really did like him inside. And then the one thing that stood out to me that I did like, I loved about him, and I've got written down. I already mentioned the size. I think he does move pretty well in space. And he's got a really strong anchor. When he gets his hands on you, he's not going to let go. It's just him getting his hands on you. And I've got written down, hey, has a, quote, not taking shit from anyone attitude. And, like, I think I saw him John with, who were the other rushers last year for UCLA? It was the set of twins. I'm failing to remember their name. But he was John with
they were brothers. I don't remember their name.
The name's on the tip of my tongue and I can't. It's like Grayson or something along those lines. But
Grace, you got something there. That buzzword just dinged in my head when you.
It's great. What is Grayson?
You're close.
I
remember because I had to figure out, did I have the same player in the draft simulator twice?
But he was just, I think, like, guy got in his face and he just turned around, helmet right to the face mask. And, like, you could tell it did not matter who it was. Gabriel, that's it. Thank you. There's the Gabriel brothers. Yeah. But he was not going to take it from anyone. And, like, you are a captain on your team. You are a large human being, and you carry that with you. Like, you own that. I love it. I absolutely loved it. I think that he's a really high floor player. I don't know if he ever finds a home as a true starting guard. I think he has an opportunity to. I think at worst he's going to be your sixth interior offensive lineman, but a really, really high prospect. A high floor prospect, I should say, with respect to that. So I loved Joshua Gray. I wanted to kind of round him out to really get that big board filled out. And with him being the last interior player I watched, it was a really fun surprise for me.
Okay. So when Clint and Newt were doing centers that was like, I think the second podcast when Owen was out of town. I think we didn't cover Jared Wilson, maybe, and we said we need to bring Clint back on so he can talk about Jared Wilson. So
no, that was Logan Jones. Jared covered Clint covered Jared Wilson.
Oh, okay, we did. Okay.
Logan Jones was Clint's boy.
Yeah. So Newt, who is your center one?
Wilson was my center one. He'd slide in. If that list was live for all of my interior offensive linemen, not just my guards, Jared Wilson would slide in right after Imbo.
Okay. And Clint, who is your center one?
Yeah, like I said earlier, it's Jared Wilson as well. I think his athleticism is going to put him ahead of the rest of that group. You know, if I look at my center groups right now, I got Jared Wilson 1, Imbo 2, Jonah Monheim 3, Jake Majors 4, Charles Grant 5, and then my big sleeper we talked about last episode, Marcus Weir, out of kind of a 5-tool player out of Montana State. That's a guy that, who was it earlier in the episode that I was talking about? It was Imbo that I said at the Senior Bowl. I think you're going to see teams are going to tell him to take some center snaps because it could help his stock. I think Ware's that same kind of conversation. That's somebody 6'2", 300, never given up a sack. He's been a 4-year starter, played right guard, right tackle, left tackle. This kid's played everywhere. Country strong kind of guy. He was an all state, all kind of everything out there. I mean, it's Montana high school football. They don't go far. But I think this guy seriously got some day 3 upside. So, and then right after that, I've got, like McLaughlin, who I admittedly need to get more into. And I love to mention a Cooper Mays earlier. I'm not high on Mays. I'm not high on Clay Webb, but those guys were worth mentioning.
Okay. And Cole, who are your top centers in this class?
Yeah, so kind of if we're going pure center, like who is at center right now, it's Weston Franklin, number one. I've been very vocal about that. I love his attitude that he plays with. His technique is great. He plays in a very kind of not necessarily hard to learn, but a more in-depth understanding of the game of football type of run scheme at Georgia Tech. But if we're going with just people that could convert to center, I'm big on Will Campbell moving all the way inside to center.
You're not and Cole, I don't think you're the first one who I've heard say that. You might be the third, but you're not the first.
I've heard that too.
Yeah.
So that would be my 1 and 2. But if we're looking, again, just at pure centers, then it would be followed by Jared Wilson at 2, Jake Majors at 3, McLaughlin at 4, and then probably Mays at that 5 spot, who I definitely do need to watch a little bit more on before I get an official evaluation in there.
Yep. And Owen, you want to take us through your centers that are shown in the graphic here?
Yeah, I missed. So as previous mentioned, I missed that week where we did like kind of hunkered down and knocked out a bunch of the centers. So I still have left to watch them in the list, which we've mentioned already. Jared Wilson and Jonah Monheim I haven't checked out yet. But for me, I finally got around to Seth McLaughlin earlier today, and I'm not going to say I am in love with him because I don't think the center class in particular is very strong. But I am probably higher than the consensus on McLaughlin. He is going to be out for the majority. I probably wouldn't play him nearly at all his rookie season just because he is still recovering from that Achilles injury, and you'd want to not kind of rush him into that, especially with the jump from college to the pros. But he's one of those guys that I think is kind of he's not an elite in any one specific area, but I do think he's just an all-around, well-played, well-versed kind of guy there. He played at Alabama since 2020, and then he made the transfer over to Ohio State for the season, and then in November, he popped his Achilles in that practice. I watched him against Iowa, Oregon, and Penn State, the original Oregon game, not the bowl game. He was out for that one. And overall, I just think I loved this build. He was stocky, had a filled up frame, had some girth on him. I didn't hate his athleticism. It's nothing insane, but I think it's NFL level. His snap exchanges were clean. He has experience both shotgun and under the center snaps. He showed decent movement for someone who's going to be 300 plus pounds. He couldn't get into space, flip and seal. I'm not worried about him doing that. In pass pro as well, if someone tries to rush him with speed, I'm not worried about him flipping and driving upfield. I felt like he looked natural out in space, looked natural as a puller, getting out in front of plays as a lead blocker. He showed off some power to be a people mover and move some players, and has length to when he gets that second level. Uses arm length and hands to absorb linebackers at that level, and that really allowed him to get extension or get space to get around him. I love how he runs his feet through contact. That's where I think he generates a lot of his power, is that kind of good footwork, being able to engage in contact and to keep the feet moving, where we see guys even like a Donovan Jackson, who I do have a high opinion of. I think that's where he kind of loses me a little bit, and why I don't have him as knocking on the table for a first round grade for him, is because I think that's something that he doesn't really do that McLaughlin does, where he can struggle to generate power through that leg drive. So McLaughlin's the guy that I think does everything right. Jesus, sorry, my cats are being rambunctious. They just tossed my phone across the room. But I think McLaughlin does everything right. I don't have any issues with him. I don't love him as like a top tier athlete, which kind of concerns me with that Achilles injury, seeing how he can bounce back from that. But as long as he can come back and get back to the level he was playing at, which wasn't already like the super high bar to meet, I do think he can come in and be like a solid player at either center or guard.
Cool. Well, we've covered at this point almost 20 players. So to do 20 players in 65 minutes is quite good. But before we close out, Clint, you want to let everybody know kind of who you are, how they can find your content?
Yeah, real quick. You could just find me on Twitter at my name, my handle at NFL Draft Dome. Most of my content is coming from covering the Falcons on SI, Falcons SI. but a lot of my draft talk is mostly on Twitter, so I'm very active there. And as far as this group, I would just say kind of a call to action. I'm excited to see some of y'all in Mobile here in a week or two.
Definitely. So it looks like Cole may have gone off camera. So Newt, do you want to let everyone know who you are, how they can find you?
Yeah, no, you can find me NFL Draft _Weston on Twitter. That's where I put out most of the content that I have, whether it's posing questions. I've been posting my top 10s for positional rankings lately. Been kind of inquiring some things. Last thing I was looking at, one group I'm dearly behind on, centers. And I think Cole was able to get me his – I'm sorry, not centers. I'm caught up in what we're doing now. Linebackers. Cole's able to get me his, which was really cool. Trying to just round out my big board and get it as up to date as possible now that we've got 99% of those players that are entering the draft made. But that's where you're going to find most of it. I also run zerotechdraft.com. Try to keep my big board fairly up to date there, at least updating it once a month. Been posting some scouting reports for players there. So yeah, that's the couple things that I'm contributing towards.
Cool. And Cole, do you want to let everybody know who you are and how they can find you?
You can find me on Twitter at all lowercase ColeP_NFL. I post draft content almost every day, work through about 1 to 3 player evaluations every day. Have about 200 guys watched and planning to have at least another 150 more by April. So you can find that every single pretty much hour of the day.
Cool. And Owen, you want to let everybody know how they can find you?
Yeah, I'm gonna be over my main platform. You can get in contact with me or see some of my thoughts. Can be over on Twitter or X at Weekly Huddle. I'll eventually get the corpse of this YouTube channel I have up and running again eventually. But outside of that, I'm just gonna be on here with the Mr. Relevant podcast. Good group of guys coming on and talking balls. So this is really where I think a lot of my effort when it comes to posting content is going to be focused on. So that'll be.
Yep. And just so everybody knows, like we don't usually have 5 people on the podcast, but Newt had parent-teacher conferences tonight, and it took 2 people to replace him. So Clint and Cole, thanks definitely for popping on. But just to let everybody that's watching know, please like the YouTube feed as well as subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have daily draft content on this channel. So the people change. There are about 30 people at Draft Professor that are putting out content. I definitely like when Clint can fill in because he's kind of like our emergency guy. He doesn't have a regular spot.
It's 6th man off the bench. That's what we're
doing. When we have parent-teacher conferences, Clint is the first person that I reach out to. So
Clint's also signed up that he knows if Clint's at the parent-teacher conference that he can easily step outside. So, yeah, no, 6th man off the bench is what we're calling me.
That works. So we have a lot of content coming your way. I know that Owen and Newt are planning a really good wide receiver episode. I've never seen a wide receiver episode done that way, and I am really excited to see it. So if you have to think about who your speed receivers are or who your gadget wide receivers are in the class, you'll definitely want to tune in for that wide receiver episode coming at you in a couple of weeks. But on behalf of all 30 people at the Draft Professor, thank you for tuning into the podcast, and we will see you on a podcast again tomorrow. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for watching this episode of the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on YouTube, X, and Twitter at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. If you have a moment, try using some of the Draft Professor mock draft functionality, including a first-round challenge, a second-round challenge, rank players, and draft a team. Thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on our daily draft podcast tomorrow.